This is WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. You are listening to One Human Nation with your host, Sandy Batiste. This program will be talking about race and race relations in your community and nationally. Our goal is to be open, honest, and productive.
Welcome to the One Human Nation show. I'm your host, Sandy Batiste, and we have a special guest in the studio today, Kristy. Welcome back to the One Human Nation show. So, yeah, if you recall, listeners, Kristy was on the show last year, towards the end of last year, I think. And so before we get started with today's show, remember the viewpoints expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of WRUU, its license holder, or its staff. So, Kristy, you want to kind of give us a little kind of a background on your involvement with the Me Too movement and how you initially got engaged in that as kind of a refresh to the listeners.
Come forward with their stories and let us know that we're not alone. So many women hid what had happened to them because they felt alone. And so the Me Too movement allowed us to all be able to talk about what had happened to us in our lives. And most every woman has a Me Too story. Some of them are rape. Some of them are sexual harassment in the workplace. It just is a wide variety. And with the Me Too movement came, to light, and everybody started talking about what had happened to them. It was it was hard for a lot of women. It was, many women had stuffed those experiences so far down to not have to deal with the emotions that come. And so in many cases, it was like ripping off of a Band-Aid. And the Rape Crisis Center has been excellent. They provide services and therapy for women and men who have been raped. No matter how long ago it has been. So the Rape Crisis Center was in a position to talk to people who had been raped decades ago and help people through those situations. And there was also a camaraderie and a lot of love and hugs from the women who had been. We were able to start that conversation
and come together as a community.
We came together as a community. There were a lot of speaking events where there's a lot of power in being able to stand up decades later and speak about what happened to you.
Right.
And so there was
and not be judged.
Right, and not be judged.
Right.
And so there was a lot of that, a lot of healing, a lot, it was just time.
Right.
It was time that this happened.
That we addressed it not only in the community level, not only on the local level, but the state level and the federal level. And I think one of the things that was a shocker to me was learning about the backlog in the rape kit. So we're going to take a listen to this clip from Fulton County that I found talking about what happened, as far as the rape kits. And this is from Fulton County. So let's take a listen to this.
Justice held up by what authorities describe as a misunderstanding between hospitals, law enforcement, and the wishes of alleged victims. But now we're starting to see some progress with kits being tested and analyzed. And according to the Fulton County District Attorney Paul Howard, this is just the beginning.
A 15-year cold case solved.
He would take these young women off of the street and he would force them into a park or an abandoned house.
Investigators say DeAndre Shabazz attacked 15 women and sexually assaulted them. DNA collected from the victims was put into storage for at least 15 years. It wasn't until last year, in 2017, that a 2003 rape kit was tested, linking Shabazz to the assault, and then 14 other cases. And listen to this. The Fulton County DA's office says there are 120 more DNA matches from other kits left in storage. 25 of those identified as serial rapists.
We are focusing upon those serial offenders.
District Attorney Paul Howard says his office plans to indict every rapist.
It is critical that we identify these defendants because many of them are serial rapists.
More than 400,000 rape kits still wait to be tested across the country. In Georgia, more than 2,000, each one a victim waiting for closure. Meanwhile, GBI receives about 250 new rape kits every month from current investigations.
The hospitals felt that many of the victims indicated to them that they did not want the kits turned over to law enforcement, so that they just sat.
Legislation passed in 2016 says law enforcement must turn over rape kit evidence to GBI within 30 days.
My hope is that this situation will not occur again.
So, Kristy, that was from Fulton County. And so, of course, I'm always a little skeptic of what I hear from one side and not hearing from the other side. So can you kind of give us an update just for Savannah, the local market here, the local community here? What's been your take on where we are with the backlog in the rape kits?
Right. We are very grateful for Representative Scott Holcomb, who led this this legislation that passed in 2016 that requires that all sexual assault kits be turned over to the GBI for testing within 30 days after the kit is collected.
That is fabulous.
So we have cleared. All of the kits were mandated in Chatham County with talking with the SVU here in Chatham County.
What's the SVU?
Special Victims Unit.
Oh, okay.
There were kits when they cleaned out their police storage room. There were kits that dated back to 1998.
Wow.
But they've all been turned over now. In Ohio, I talked to the Attorney General of Ohio, Mike DeWine, and they had a same problem there, and they had about the same number of kits that we had backlogged in the state of Georgia. And he really made it a priority to clear his backlog kits in what has now been set as a national best practice. He doubled his staff, he doubled his equipment. He really put the resources and the money into clearing these backlogged kits. And his scientists test every piece of evidence that is in the kit. In Georgia, unfortunately, our GBI only tests the one piece of evidence that they think has the most DNA. So Ohio is getting 40% CODIS hits. So when they test their DNA, they're getting
a higher percentage.
Much higher percentage. We're getting about 6-7% here in Georgia, which is concerning to me. And my opinion is that it's because the GBI is not testing
the entire kit. Interesting.
Also, the GBI did not get enough additional funding from the state legislature to deal with this problem appropriately, to add the number of scientists that they need, to double the, to do the equipment.
Right.
Additionally, there's a lack of transparency in the GBI. They really don't want to answer the questions about this. They don't want to give full disclosure about what has happened to all the backlog kits.
But don't they realize that not having that transparency, especially in the environment that we are in our society right now, where everything is questionable, right. I think most people are waking up to the fact, what we've been told or what we thought all of these years we're finding out is not true, you
Right.
know, and the propaganda we've been fed by the media and what we thought were reliable, reputable resources really were part of this whole, you know, conspiracy cover up. And part of it's political, so people could be reelected on this wonderful platform that all life was rosy.
Right.
And I think it was like a splash of cold water, you know, in your face to realize that, wait a minute, we haven't been told the truth. So,
Right.
you know, the lack of transparency, I think, in any structure creates a problem.
Correct.
Especially even more so now because people are just more skeptical, which is what we should be. We should be questioning.
Absolutely.
So what would you recommend as far as some actions that people can take locally here for Savannah based on the reluctance to release accurate information? What can we do?
Right. Well, it really needs additional funding.
Right.
The Special Victims Unit for the Savannah Police Department is woefully underfunded. If
Yeah.
you took their caseload, they would be working 120 hours per week, every week, to appropriately
Oh my goodness.
address their caseload.
And you can't
they
physically,
they
you
can't
can't, you physically do that.
They also need better training. There was a situation in Savannah where there was a rape, and the police detective interviewing the woman asked, why didn't she scream for help?
Gosh.
So right there, that's a case that the district attorney's office can't put in front of a jury, because that gives the jury, when that tape would be played, that would give it
Right.
the jury reasonable doubt.
Right.
And so right there, that it becomes a case that has to be pled out versus prosecuted. Also, there was a case that the DA had, and they're also not being given additional funding that they need.
Right.
But there was a case that the DA had, and they had set, there was a jury that was ready to go. The perpetrator claimed that in Georgia, right now, the definition of rape is penetration. There has to be penetration. He claimed that there wasn't penetration. Well, the GBI had only tested the external evidence and not the internal evidence. So the ADA had to go back to the GBI and beg them to please test so that there could be evidence that there was penetration. So there's a lot of problems along the way that create a situation where it's hard for the DA's office to prosecute many of these cases. I've met with the ADAs who do the rape, and I do feel that they have a passion and a desire to prosecute these cases. It's fixing the problems along the way.
Right. There's a systemic problem.
Right.
And it gets back to money and funding.
Yeah, it really does go back to money and funding, where the county, Chatham County Commission, and the mayor and aldermen need to make this a priority.
Right.
People that are rapists are not exclusionary.
Right.
They also do other crimes, but we like to sweep rape under the rug because it primarily affects women. It affects more women than it does men.
Right.
And many times women's issues are not being taken as seriously so we need to do a better job of funding, better job of training our police officers, not to re-victimize the victim. There is, like you said, a lot of systemic problems. We need to investigate these cases so that when they do get to the DA's office has everything they need to be able to prosecute these cases.
So, Kristy, let me ask you, and I think we covered this on the previous show that we did, but I think it's beneficial to kind of revisit what the process is for the victim from the time, it's like, who do they call, when they make the call, when they go to the hospital? What is that process like? If you can, look at it from the victim's point of view and what that entails.
There is no right or wrong way, in my opinion. When you have been raped, there's no wrong way.
Right.
A victim doesn't have a responsibility to even report it. The ideal way of being able to collect the evidence
Right.
that would lead to a strong
Case.
that's prosecutable would be for the victim to go to the emergency room immediately,
Okay.
without showering or anything else. Historically, and there's a really good HBO documentary right now called I Am Evidence
Okay.
that really deals with this. Historically, police officers have had opinions about how a rape victim should act, that they should be hysterical and crying. But scientific evidence has shown that that's
It's
not
just the
always
opposite.
case,
Exactly.
that there is a whole range of motions.
Right.
And so historically, police reports have, you can look at some of these police reports saying it's a good rape or a bad rape.
Oh my
meaning
goodness.
that a bad rape, they don't feel it's credible. And if you look at cases where they say it's a bad rape, historically it has been mostly black women. In the movie I Am Evidence, there is a part of the movie where they interview a woman who's a SANE nurse, and SANE nurses are specially trained to collect evidence after a rape. And she says in the movie, in the documentary, if she got a call saying, we need you to come immediately down
Right.
to the emergency room to do this, she knew that it was either a white woman or a black woman who was related to a pastor or related to a politician. If she
Okay.
got a call saying, we have a case, just come when you can, she knew it was a black woman.
Okay.
So there's a lot of racial,
Right.
disparities in how we deal with rape. Also, you have to go through it. It can be, over 10 hours of an exam.
Right.
The police, in my opinion, should never determine. A woman is not going to want to put herself through a 10-hour exam that is extremely invasive. They are combing your pubic hair. They are doing internal exams.
Yeah.
They are taking photographs of areas that you've never thought would take photographs of your body. It's extremely invasive.
Yeah.
And so we really need to train our police officers to not victimize the victim, to be sensitive and not make judgments that they're
Right.
not qualified
Right
to
to make. Exactly.
and not ask questions that would make the case impossible to prosecute when it gets to
Right.
the DA's office. And it's extremely important that all states participate in this and put the resources toward this.
Right.
Because many times these rapists cross state lines.
Oh.
And they're going to rape again. Oftentimes they end up murdering. They're in the movie I Am Evidence, there's one situation where they follow where a truck driver had a route from California to Ohio.
Oh my
And
goodness.
he would rape women
all across.
way,
Oh my
right.
goodness.
And so it wasn't until years, like a decade or more later, that he was actually, when they started
Putting the pieces
testing
together.
the rape kits,
Yeah.
when they actually started doing that and they got the CODIS hits, that they were able to arrest him and put him behind bars. And he was a serial rapist.
Wow.
And so it is really important that all states adopt the best practice, like Ohio. Mike DeWine established in Ohio, who's a Republican now running for governor. But it doesn't matter what party.
It doesn't matter what
doesn't matter
party,
what
and
party.
I think that's what that we all need to realize. I've been doing shows that really focus on how I think it's intentional because of how things are structured in this country as far as who has the power, who has the money to influence political elections. And, that's the dark side of politics, because it does take money. And typically, if you're coming into this as a female or minority trying to run for office, you just don't have those kind of connections. So it's extremely difficult, because you do need money based on how we are now structured in this country. And, they say politics makes strange bedfellows, that kind of deal, because you have to, at some point, start accepting funds maybe from a resource that you would typically not do. You have to make these choices because you need the money. And so you can either take the high road and say, well, I'm not going to take money from them because of blah, blah, blah. We're not aligned philosophically on our issues. But then it comes down to money. That kind of deal. And I do want to touch base on something you mentioned about African American women and the stigma attached to race, because I'm going to be doing a show that's really is impactful for all of us to realize and start recognizing this country, the impact of decades of trauma. That there's such a thing as ancestral DNA, that we need to take a look at how this impacts generation from generations. And for African American women, because of the slavery, we were raped. And I don't, it doesn't matter what kind of face you want to put on it to say, well, no, they didn't really, it was consensual, or, there was a relation. No, it was rape. It was rape. And there was no choice. Right. And so I think that's part of the DNA for African American women. It's just something that you just suppress because you don't feel like, anybody's going to listen to you, or someone in your circle, because a lot of times it may even be somebody that that's raped you. And it opens up all of these family, drama. And typically there could be another female in the family that has also been raped and not reported it for that reason, because there's still this stigma attached, or this denial attached, or this hopelessness. Right. That you have no power, that you don't have any way to, for want of a better word, get justice for the situation. So you just suck it up.
And the broken system
adds to that.
Have in this country adds to that.
Right.
Many women feel that in these situations that they're not going to be believed.
Right.
But African American women, even more so.
Right.
Because it has happened.
Historically.
The scientific evidence.
Exactly.
Historical and scientific evidence prove that is the situation, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And we need to do a better job as a country.
We need to do a better job as a country, and we need to do better jobs as individuals, that if you know somebody that has been, if they come to you, then, be prepared to give them some direction that's constructive, and be supportive and non-judgmental. One of my friends, she said, it doesn't matter if a female was walking down the street buck naked. It does not give somebody the right to rape them, to say, well, they were asking for it, No. And, it could be that person had a mental issue and they didn't even realize they were walking down the street buck naked, So there is a judgment. There is a judgment about, were they, because of the way they were dressed, or, where they were, at a club or that kind of deal. They were just asking for it, And
all that will come up in a hearing.
Yeah.
And one area where this country fails miserably is teaching young men about consent.
Yes.
20% of all women who go to college are raped or sexually assaulted by the time they graduate.
Wow.
We are doing a horrible disservice to our young boys and young men by not teaching them exactly what consent is and
Right.
consent is not. And you can be, a woman could be drinking and making out with a man in college, and if she passes out,
Right.
that's it. But that's not how these young boys and young men are being taught.
Right.
And the freshman year is when young women are most
vulnerable.
is
Yeah.
that freshman year of college. And these older boys, it's just a very dangerous situation, and it is never the woman's fault, and we need to understand that.
Yes.
It doesn't matter what they're wearing, it doesn't matter what they're drinking, it doesn't matter any of that. Consent is consent, and we
Right.
need to do a better job of teaching our young men to be aware of that and to
Right.
learn what that is. And we're not teaching it in schools. We
Nope.
need to get better curriculum. My son knows it because it has been talked about
Right.
openly in our family and in our home. But many parents are afraid to
Yeah.
talk about sex and talk about consent.
Exactly.
And
I mean, they don't even
so-
want to talk about sex, much
Right.
less consent.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And so we just have to do a much better job as a society.
I agree with you. And so it's time for us to take a little break and make some announcements. And we'll come back and continue our
Thanks, Sandy.
conversation. So here's our station identification, as well as some PSA announcements. And we'll come back with Kristy to continue this conversation and to segue into a different topic about our youth involvement in activism and being more civically engaged, and how that's going to impact, I think, our entire country in the future. So let's make these announcements. And thank you. If you just tuned in, you're listening to the One Human Nation Show. I'm your host, Sandy Batiste.
Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
The University of Georgia Marine Education Center and Aquarium is located in Savannah on Skidaway Island. Home to Georgia's first saltwater aquarium, it features 16 exhibit tanks that showcase a variety of Georgia's marine life. In addition to the aquarium, the facility hosts educational exhibits, public programs, summer camps, an ADA-compliant nature boardwalk, and special events. For more information, visit gacoast.uga.edu or call 912-598-2496.
WRUU 107.5 FM's Summer Business Auction is right around the corner. Now's your time to donate a gift card or certificate for a product or service to be auctioned off in an online catalog next month. If your business uses gift cards or certificates, or if you can donate a gift card or certificate in any way, please let us know. Your donation will help Savannah's community radio station continue to provide unique music and talk programs that you enjoy. To donate a gift card or certificate, email fundraising@wruu.org. That's fundraising@wruu.org. Thank you for listening and to supporting WRUU. So if you just tuned in, you're listening to the One Human Nation Show, and we have a guest here, Kristy, talking about, where we are in our community as well as in our society addressing sexual assault. And so I do want, Kristy, if you have it on you, do you have the number for the Rape Crisis Center?
Yes.
I should have asked you to kind of pull that out, because I do think that's an excellent resource that we have in the Savannah community. So Kristy's now I have to laugh because she actually has a flip phone, people. I didn't even know those were still even available to use, but I'm seeing it with my own eyes, and it's amazing. It's so tiny, and it's really a flip phone. I think I had a flip phone, and I did for years, but that's been many moons ago. So,
Yes, I actually prefer it. Okay, the Rape Crisis Center number is 233-3000. Again, it's 912-233-3000.
so one of the things I was thinking with the Rape Crisis, do they also do educational workshops or anything? If people wanted to get information, where would someone that says, you know what, this is something I want to get involved in? Because I think we all have to choose. We can't be involved in everything.
Right.
And so if it's something that resonates with you, how can somebody be involved as a volunteer or just to be more informed?
Right. If you want to be a volunteer, they do have a volunteer coordinator at the Rape Crisis Center.
Okay.
One area that they do need a lot of people is on the crisis line.
Okay.
During the day, they have staff there that volunteers to answer questions when people call in who have been raped or affected by rape. At night, they do offer a 24-hour 24/7 crisis line.
Okay.
And so they need volunteers to be trained and then people to answer those calls throughout the night. And that is something that I have done in the past. And you will have women calling at 2 or 3 in the morning when they can't sleep and they're having nightmares. And so it is a wonderful resource that the Rape Crisis Center
That is good.
Provides.
Because our demons pretty much come out at night.
Yes, you're right. They do. Also, the Rape Crisis Center is really a frontline responder. They are as important, if not more important, than the police who respond to hospital calls when a woman is raped. Because the Rape Crisis Center is there in the room helping the victim, helping the woman or the man who has been raped, making sure that they understand what's going on. Many times the clothes that the person is wearing who has been raped are taken as evidence. So the Rape Crisis Center provides new clothes for that person to go home in. They are just as essential in our community as a first-line responder as the police in these situations.
So who would call the Rape Crisis Center? Is it the hospital does? Okay, okay. Because I'm thinking as a victim, if I got myself to the hospital, that was probably all I could manage at that particular point in time. You're not going to typically have the Rape Crisis Center number in your phone book, that kind of deal, because I don't think people walk around expecting to be raped, that kind of deal.
When a woman reports to the hospital and says that she's been raped, there is a separate room that they go in. They're not sitting there in the waiting room with the rest of people that are coming to the emergency room. So there's a separate quiet room. They will then call the Rape Crisis Center and call a SANE nurse. The SANE nurses are the ones that are specifically trained.
What does SANE stand for?
Sexual assault.
Something.
Nursing, nurse examiner, I think. Sexual assault
nurse examiner. Okay.
And they are specially trained to collect the evidence that the police and the district attorney will need to prosecute these cases. So once that kit is collected, then within 30 days, because of Representative Holcomb, it has to go to the GBI, and the GBI will test it. Again, going back to, I don't feel that our GBI is doing an adequate job in testing all the evidence, but it does get tested, and it does then go back to the police as evidence, and the process will then eventually lead to it going to the district attorney's office.
Okay, so once again, you're listening to the One Human Nation show, and at this time, we're going to kind of do a little segue into talking about something totally different from this topic that we've been talking about as far as the rape crisis and the backlog kits. And this involves the activism of our youth. So I think a good way to do that is to take a listen. We're going to take a listen to this clip that I think from 3 or 4 months ago, and this is based on the gun violence in schools and the activism from the youth in Florida that were directly impacted by this violent situation in their schools. So let's take a listen.
We begin tonight with the massive rallies across America. Teenagers leading the charge from New England to California. Hundreds of thousands taking part in the March for Our Lives, demanding tougher gun control laws and an end to school shootings. Officials planning for at least 500,000 people in Washington, D.C., crowds as far as the eye can see, 175,000 in New York alone, a sea of people in Atlanta, St. Paul, Dallas, and Los Angeles. The movement led by survivors of the shooting rampage that killed 17 people at Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, and more than 800 events taking place around the world. ABC's David Wright leads us off from Washington tonight.
Pennsylvania Avenue, the main street of American politics, today packed with people from the doorstep of the U.S. Capitol almost to the doorstep of the White House. Hundreds of thousands of people standing shoulder to shoulder to condemn gun violence.
At the end of the day, bullets do not discriminate, so why should we?
Young people, including the survivors of Parkland, not even old enough to vote, led the way.
When politicians send their thoughts and prayers with no action, we say no more. And to those politicians supported by the NRA that allow the continued slaughter of our children and our future, I say get your resumes ready.
My friends and I might still be 11, and we might still be in elementary school, but we know what is right and wrong.
In New York City, protesters marched from Central Park to Times Square. ABC's Zachary Quiche in the thick of it.
Can this movement, can this march, your voice, can it be the difference, the catalyst?
It has to be. We don't have a choice of whether it's going to be or not. It has to be the difference.
In Parkland, Florida, in Texas and other deep red states, in California and other blue states, the crowds exceeded expectations. Some of the marchers have a personal connection to this issue.
I'm from Newtown, Connecticut.
So this issue hits close to home for you.
It absolutely does.
17-year-old Susanna Barna is a photographer for the Eagle Eye, the school newspaper at Stoneman Douglas High School. She was there, locked down, the day a gunman murdered 17 people in her school. Having been through that, it must be quite emotional to be here today.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's hard to describe it just because it's so overwhelming. It's so much. But I mean, I know that this is something I'm going to look back on one day, and this is a story I'm going to be telling my grandkids.
Now we're going to sing it to you, y'all.
Today, plenty of celebrities lent their talents and their voices to this cause. Among them, Paul McCartney in New York, who reminded the crowd how John Lennon was murdered.
One of my best friends was killed in gun violence right around here, so it's important to me.
But it was the kids who took center stage, the emotional high point. Emma Gonzalez, a Parkland survivor, on stage for 6 minutes and 20 seconds, the amount of time it took the shooter to turn her community upside down.
All right, so Kristy, can you share the involvement, because you've got a teenage son that became very, I think it was just hard to see everything that's happening. And, for the African American community, it's like we've been talking about this, the gun violence in our schools. I actually have a niece that's, completing her senior year online. Because of what the conditions were in the school. And it was a relatively new school, but it was already going down the path of, it just wasn't a safe place for her. She didn't feel safe there. And so her parents agreed to, allow her to finish up her senior year online, which to me is kind of sad. It's kind of sad. So can you talk about, how did this impact like your son, and what things have they been involved in Savannah to bring the awareness, especially because this is a group of youth that in the very near future are going to be able to vote. and we know the power is in the vote. So share your thoughts on that and kind of how that's shaping up for Savannah.
Well, I'm very proud of this generation of students. I firmly believe that they will get done what we weren't able to do.
Yes.
And just watching them has been an inspiration. I don't think that we have seen a generation of students this knowledgeable and this passionate since the 1960s with the Vietnam War.
I agree.
And locally, the students here, many high schools did, the massacre in Parkland occurred on February 14th. And on March 14th, many of the students had a student organized walkout of schools that gained a lot of national and local attention. And my son was one of the organizers, the student organizers. It was completely student-led, student-organized. They did not want any assistance from the adults. They want to make sure that their voices are heard and that their voices are not watered down.
Which I'm sure was hard for a lot of adults because, you know, there's this generation of adults that really want to protect their children.
Right.
And, you know, I think they call them helicopter parents or whatever, you know, that kind of deal, but hovering, you know, that kind of deal. So I'm sure that was hard for a lot of the parents to step back, or, you know, if you've got this type of youth personality in your household, maybe you were more prepared for it because you already saw that this person was their own person.
Right. I was just so proud of the students for just taking this on and making it their own. And, you know, and same with the March for Our Lives, the same thing. It was all student-led, student-organized. There were no adults that spoke at those events.
Right.
It was really the voice of the students. I was surprised. I attended the events, and I was surprised at the level of discourse that these students, they had researched it, they knew their facts, they knew how gun violence was affecting their communities across racial lines. We've had a lot of recent young black men here in Savannah that have been shot.
Right.
With one young man from Windsor Forest at the McDonald's.
Right.
The one young man at the funeral.
Right.
So they realized that this gun violence, bullets don't discriminate.
Exactly.
And I'm just really proud of what they're doing. A group of students had been asking our congressman for a town hall where only students were able to ask questions. And his staff was stonewalling them and saying, no, you have to talk to your principal, and your principal can contact our office, and maybe we can arrange a visit. And the students kept insisting, that's not the type of thing. We don't want a dog and pony show. And so I was very proud of the fact that my son went to Washington, D.C., called the scheduler, said, I want a meeting with my congressman. I am going to be eligible to vote this year. I want a meeting with my congressman. And he took the subway by himself, went up to Capitol Hill, went to the congressman's office and sat down and said, in Savannah, we want a student town hall meeting. We want a meeting where only students can ask you questions. We want you to hear our voices, and we don't want to be pushed aside and not considered. And Congressman Buddy Carter, to his credit, has said that he will do that. It will be happening next month in August. The students, again, are the ones who are working on a location, working directly with the congressman's staff. This generation is
awake.
They're awake. They're far more concerned about what's happening in their communities than previous generations. They're smarter. They've
been exposed to so much, and with the technology and social media, you know, to me, it's encouraging to see. And the hope is that's my hope.
Right.
You know, I can do what I can do within my sphere of influence, but my hope is through the future generations. And I can't remember which student basically said this is, you know, if you can send me, you know, information on signing up for the military, why can't you include a voter's registration card, you know, when I turn 18, you know, so they are very much more away, because I didn't realize, and I've been keeping up with, you know, locally through the Chatham County school system, the Savannah school system, what's been going on, but to recognize the communication skills, how articulate they are. And it's just very obvious, you know, and I'm just inspired and motivated by that. And so it's like whatever I can do to assist it makes me feel good. Just to know that future generations have got this.
And you mentioned voter registration. At the school walkout, there were voter registration booths, and they did register a lot of students who were 18 or will be turning 18 by the next election. So there's always been in these components where the youth students are organizing these events, like the march. They are making sure that there are voter registration components to these events. The Parkland students right now are on a nationwide tour to encourage other students and youth to register to vote and to exercise their right to vote. They are visiting, I believe it's either every county in Florida or every congressional district in Florida.
Wow.
And they've taken it nationwide. They're visiting many cities. I know they're doing Atlanta and Charleston. They've done, you know, New York, Boston, all the big, Minneapolis, California. They're really doing this nationwide bus tour, and every day this summer they're in a different city and speaking to large crowds and having voter registration components to make sure that students are registered to vote, know when elections are, and research the candidates
and not be pulled into the propaganda that one political party is better than the other. I do have a question when you mentioned, you know, this engagement, which takes money. So how are they getting funded to do this?
I am not sure how the Parkland students are getting. If you go to the March for Our Lives, you can make a contribution on the website. I think it's a lot of individual donors are contributing to help pay for the bus and transportation.
Because I was thinking, it's like, how are they affording to do this? They're students, and some may be working, but some probably are not, you know, so that's interesting. And you mentioned that there's going to be an event in Savannah coming up in August. Is there a way that the students in Savannah, because I know there are going to be parents listening to this, and there may be some students that are interested, how do they get connected to that?
Well, once the details are finalized, I'm sure that there will be a lot of social media. And I can have my son get into contact with you. Again, this is all being organized by the students. The date has not been confirmed yet with the congressman's office. But once the details,
that'd be perfect.
I'll make sure that he contacts you. You know, you might even, you know, I'm sure there'd be a group of students that would be willing to do a show with you.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
To talk about their passion, their fears, their hopes. I get nervous talking. I don't want to talk on their behalf.
Exactly. Influence the conversation. Or take the limelight.
Water down their voice.
Exactly.
Because their voices are strong, and they don't need, by adults dominating the conversation, it takes away.
It dilutes it
from their credibility and the strength of their voices.
Well, Kristy, we're wrapping up to the end of our time together. I know, it goes so fast.
It's like it's a wonderful conversation every time I come. It's just
I just
delightful.
enjoy it.
I do too.
It's like
so fast, and we could talk for hours.
For hours, and then I look at the clock and go, oh, I guess we start needing to do the wrap up time. So you're always welcome on the One Human Nation show, and we will definitely continue to monitor how we're doing in Savannah, and how we can engage in the struggle really on the rape kit crisis, and the fact that it does need funding to make this work, and it's unfortunate that, the world goes around based on money, but, we have to have the technology, we have to have the staff, it's just problematic.
And we need to make rape a priority. We need to see it as the violent crime that it is.
Right.
And put the funding,
apply it where it needs.
And we need to realize that rapists aren't exclusion. I mean, they do commit a variety of other. A rape kit is actually processing a rape kit is probably one of the most cost-effective ways to get criminals off the streets.
I agree with you. So once again, thanks for being on the One Human Nation show, and just as a reminder to our listeners, the viewpoints expressed in the preceding program are not necessarily those of WRUU, its license holder, or its staff. So just some housekeeping issues. If you want to share your story about race, racism, what your experiences have been, you can email me at mystory@onehumannation.info. If there's a particular topic that you want to have covered, there's a different email address for that, and that's onehumannation, WRUU@gmail.com. Again, that email address is onehumannation, WRUU@gmail.com. Keep in mind, we do have a podcast that's available. So if you're on iTunes, you can search for One Human Nation, and we'll come up in the podcast, so you can listen to past episodes there. You can also subscribe at the Podbean website, and that's podbean.com, and subscribe there. So every time I upload an episode, you would automatically get notification. If you can't listen to the show when it airs on Thursdays at 5 Eastern Daylight Time, you can also listen at our archived website through WRUU.org. It requires a little bit more clicks for that. You would need to go to the WRUU.org website. Then you need to click on Schedule and Archives. Go to Thursday, scroll down to One Human Nation, and click there, and you'll see the most recent shows that have been uploaded there also. I also have a YouTube channel that's under Sandy Batiste, and so you can also access it there. So I've tried to put it out there as many places as possible, because I realize that there's a lot going on in our lives, but I think this is an important issue that we have a voice to talk about, an underlying issue not only in the Savannah community, but how we reconcile about race and racism, and doing it in a way that is safe, honest, open, and productive. So we're going to wrap up today's show and prepare for Troy Stoner coming up with Sound Limits. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for more shows from the One Human Nation show.